Good morning. Welcome to the Pathfinder Indian Ocean Security Conference Phase 3. May I please ask you to rise for the arrival of our chief guest, His Excellency the President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. Thank you. You may now be seated. May I kindly request the attendees to either switch off your phones or have them on silent mode. To begin the inaugural session, may I please invite Ambassador Bernard Goonetilleke to deliver his welcome remarks.
Good morning, Your Excellency President Wickremesinghe, Your Excellencies representing the diplomatic missions based in Colombo, Ambassador Shivshankar Menon, co-chair of the conference, Mr. Melinda Morogoda, founder of the Pathfinder Foundation, distinguished participants. I wish to warmly welcome the participants for the Indian Ocean region and beyond attending today's hybrid event in person and virtually. Pathfinder Foundation, an apolitical and not-for-profit think tank, commenced its work in 2008. Security and strategic studies have been the Foundation's particular area of focus. In pursuit of our interest, we have focused on all aspects of the Indian Ocean and the vibrant Bay of Bengal. In that process, over the years, we have conducted numerous events such as conferences, seminars, workshops, etc., in association with local and foreign academic institutions as well as think tanks. The Phase 3 of the Indian Ocean Security Conference follows the previous two phases, which were held in 2020 and 22. Those endeavors reflected the abiding interest of the Foundation in fostering dialogues on ocean-related issues. Another ongoing focus of ours is the annual Bay of Bengal Maritime Dialogue, co-hosted in association with the Swiss-based Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. The next dialogue will be held in Colombo 3 months from now. In 2017 and 2018, Pathfinder hosted 2 regional meetings known as Trincomalee consultations, focusing on issues relating to the Bay of Bengal. It was also an attempt to focus on Trincomalee, which has one of the largest natural harbors in the world, to identify the role it could play in providing services to the Bay of Bengal community. July last year, Sri Lanka signed an MOU with India to develop the long neglected Trincomalee harbor as well as outlying areas. Meanwhile, President Wickremesinghe, in his earlier capacity as Prime Minister, engaged the services of Surbana Jurong, a Singapore-based state-owned consultancy company, to design a blueprint to develop Trincomalee, which we hope will take off soon. In 2018, the Foundation also launched an occasional paper to stimulate interest in a code of conduct for the Indian Ocean as an extension to the Djibouti Code of Conduct. covering the Western Indian Ocean. All these activities demonstrate our continuous interest in the ocean that provides access and livelihood to millions of people living on the shores of the vast Indian Ocean. Of all the oceans in the world, the Indian Ocean plays a pivotal role in providing economic prosperity, security, and environmental well-being to millions of people living in the coastal area of the Indian Ocean and the wider global community, thereby conceding a preeminent position to the Indian Ocean. Considering this water body's importance, we must recognize its pivotal role in global trade and commerce as a veritable storehouse of natural resources, both on shore and offshore, and in ensuring international security and stability. No wonder why some ports in Sri Lanka, such as Mahatita or Mahatota, known as Mahatota, yes, in the ancient times, Trincomalee, Galle, Colombo, were coveted by Arabs, Ethiopians, known as Abyssinians those days, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Chinese, and Europeans over the last several centuries. Today, the Indian Ocean is expanding, albeit metaphorically, to embrace the Pacific, which is not a geographical entity but a strategic construction. In that process, it has been baptized as Indo-Pacific. Although the Indo-Pacific concept dates back to the German geopolitician Karl Haushofer, who lived in 1920s, the idea gained ground with the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's vision of free and open Indo-Pacific, which he elaborated in Kenya in 2016 after outlining the hypothesis in a speech he made in the Indian Parliament 9 years earlier. Since then, the US and its allies, having realized the strategic advantage of combining the two oceans, have enthusiastically embraced and promoted the concept of free and open Indo-Pacific. Some may question the motives behind Sri Lanka's deep interest in the Indian Ocean. In size and population, Sri Lanka is considerably smaller than some of its Asian neighbors. However, our island has been rewarded with a strategically important geographical location in the Indian Ocean to offset that deficiency. Sitting adjacent to the vital sea line of communication connecting the east and the west, Sri Lanka's strategic importance with its deep water facilities in the eastern, western, and southern coastlines was described as an aircraft carrier parked 14 miles off the Indian coast by our co-chairman Ambassador Menon in his book Choices. The EEZ of Sri Lanka covers 510 square kilometers, and in keeping with 1982 Law of the Sea Convention, Sri Lanka's jurisdiction over the continental shelf will surpass its landmass at least by 20 times. Against such a scenario, it is only natural for Sri Lanka to demonstrate its abiding interest in the vast ocean surrounding the island. Now, to turn our focus on the conference. We will first discuss Indo-Pacific strategy and its implications to the Indian Ocean community. We hope our focus will allow participants to understand how the Indo-Pacific strategy will impact the populations living on the shores of the Indian Ocean. Maritime domain awareness is a subject that has gained much interest recently. The Indian Ocean covers approximately 70.5 million square kilometers, which is by any standard a vast area. countries in the Indian Ocean region will naturally find it beyond their means to police this enormous stretch of water effectively. While these shortcomings over maritime domain awareness are being addressed, there is scant knowledge of what goes on beneath the surface of this vast body of water. Lack of resources and scarcity of technical know-how prevent the Asian and African countries from the global south from investing in the development of underwater capability and benefiting from the blue economic opportunities the Indian Ocean can provide. Session 2 of our event is devoted to security and economic dimensions of underwater domain awareness, which will allow us to understand issues relating to the subject matter. Finally, the third session will cover three broad areas: climate change, disaster management, and blue-green economy. With this, I conclude my opening remarks. While wishing the conference success, on behalf of the Pathfinder Foundation, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to His Excellency the President for gracing the occasion despite his busy schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Goonetilleke. May I now kindly invite His Excellency, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, to address the conference.
Your Excellencies, co-chairs, distinguished guests. It gives me great pleasure to be here with you and with the Pathfinder Foundation in addressing one of the key issues for us in Sri Lanka, for us in the region, and for all of us in the world. I must also commend Mr. Milinda Morogoda for having organized this session and for the continuing interest that has been shown in security and this region. The Indian Ocean, let's take it on its own, not as a part of BRI or part of the Indo-Pacific. Indian Ocean has now ceased to be in the backwaters, and we have become one of the strategic geopolitical regions in the world. It has happened in the last 5-6 years. Events have helped us more than any other issue. So how does Asia fit into this context? Asia, after all, has its own identity, an identity older than that of Europe. The first set of geopolitics was played both in the Mediterranean and in the Indian Ocean. And the Indian Ocean geopolitics have gone on, and it has also changed the politics of the world. Britain's second empire and its rise to preeminence was due to India. Without India, Britain was nothing. That's what Churchill realized. So he opposed the independence being granted to the Indian empire, but that was too late. By that time, the world opinion had turned in favor of India, and more than that, 2.5 million Indians had fought in the World War II and they were returning. Now that's something they could not deal with. So that's one. That certainly had impact. India has always influenced the outcome of the Indian Ocean geopolitics to a large extent. In the Muslim kingdoms, the Arab kingdoms was another, and for some time Indonesia and that area from the time of Srivijaya onwards. So this is basically Asia. Of course, colonial rule meant that we were shoved into the backwaters, but nevertheless, we were one of the most important regions in World War II. And after independence, we started reasserting identity. Firstly, even before independence, Prime Minister Nehru summoned the Asian Relations Conference. This was followed by Prime Minister John Kotalawala, who summoned the Colombo Powers Conference, which in turn summoned the Bandung Conference. Now, Bandung is the key watermark. That is where the Asian identity was established. And we carried that forward. Thereafter, Prime Minister Nehru with President Tito and Nassau started the non-aligned movement. You had to include Indonesia, who was responsible for summoning the second Bandung Conference, Asia-African Conference, and also Sri Lanka, which got involved. So, India, Indonesia, Sri Lanka has been involved throughout. Pakistan and Myanmar at different stages dropped out. Now, what has happened now? In the last 5 years, we have come to the forefront for different reasons. One is the build-up of tensions over Taiwan and in Asia, in East Asia, which has resulted in China shifting its emphasis to the Indian Ocean. And the Silk Route the BRI has played a prominent role. The only question that has come is with the debt crisis of how the debt is to be handled by China. So that's one issue that's come up. But during the process, one thing else happened. The Ukraine war, the sanctions imposed by the West did not result in the collapse of the Russian economy. It just shifted eastward. If you look at the amount of oil that is being refined in the Gulf refineries, it is far more than what is found in the Middle East. With the Russian and the Iranian oil, no one knows, we don't know what we are buying. There's a certificate. But whole of the Russian economy shifted here into this region towards Singapore and Hong Kong, but this became the main region, is Dubai. So Russia has not collapsed, but the Russian economy instead of looking westward, has come eastwards. And the money is here. So that became one presence. Secondly, Iran. Iran and Saudi Arabia has made up part due to the Chinese intervention. So that's the second power block that's coming up. The Arab nations and the Sunnis and the Shias, both are coming together. They have their differences, but nevertheless they are talking to each other, and some relationship has come about. But it also means in the medium term the rise of Iran. After all, the road to Central Asia lies through Iran, and India is helping Iran also in developing the second port. So you got a second group there. Third one is India. India itself become one of the largest economies, and Indian market will keep expanding till late 21st century. So look at the potential for India, which everyone has recognized. And next is Indonesia. And finally South Africa. So you can see how the new power balancers have come. First was the issue of the US-Chinese rivalry, which brought China in here. Secondly is the presence of Russia, rise of Iran, even Turkey is showing interest, and a larger presence of China as it happened there. So these and then the rise of the Asian powers. But it goes beyond that. For instance, you have the Shanghai Cooperation countries bordering the Indian Ocean, 3 of them. Another aspect are the BRICS. The majority of the BRICS are in this region. These are the ones who are challenging the supremacy of the dollar. You take India, you take South Africa, and Saudi Arabia, take Iran, even Egypt. So all those countries are around the Indian Ocean. In a sense, it's building up on the one of the resolutions of the Bandung Conference on economic. So the center has come back here because we were somehow or other Indian nations want to take the lead again, and that's happening. Then within it, what are we committed to? Sri Lanka is committed to, with its strategic position, to ensure there is no big power rivalry and the freedom of navigation. The freedom of navigation has led us now to take part in the operations Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea, because as you see now, as the rates go up, Suez Canal is important for us. During the 6-day war, when the canal was closed, for 10 years the Colombo port suffered. So we have to ensure that there is, as far as we are concerned, freedom of navigation exists there. The main issues have been the Somali pirates and now the Houthis. Houthis themselves are terrorist organization because we have recognized the Yemen government. So this is one part. The other issue which is now coming up is the undersea domain as far as security is concerned. How do you deal with that? So we feel now that Indian Ocean is the future. Then what is our relationship? How do we fit into the Indo-Pacific? That's something that has to be worked out. Because basically, as Bernard Goonetilleke said, it's of recent origin. After World War II, you had the San Francisco system to maintain American dominance in the area, and the Shanghai Communique, which brought China and US together. So with these two, we saw the emergence of Asia Pacific when relations were good. Now the relations have turned sour. So are we to be the battleground in the Indian Ocean? Secondly, to me it was a lackadaisical approach of bringing the Indian Ocean in. All of a sudden decided that Indo-Pacific will stop at the western boundary of India. Now that is not our ocean. That's not something that we could accept. For us, the ocean went all the way up to the African coast. Now the Chinese went one step further. They didn't stop at the African coast. They thought of putting a rail line which should take them to the Atlantic coast. On one hand, you are drawing the line at the Indian coast. Other one is taking it all the way up to the Atlantic coast. So those are the differences that's come up. So this meant that we had to see how it's being developed. It's only now, and that raises one of the issues, whether this is really an extension of the manifest destiny. It brought them into Hawaii, to Philippines, into Asia Pacific. Is it manifest destiny here? Because then everyone else here has a manifest destiny. India has a manifest destiny. Indonesia thinks of a manifest destiny. So we'll have a mix of manifest destinies in the Indian Ocean. So I think we have to sit down and discuss it. And finally, of course, came the fact that Prime Minister Modi and others extended the Indian Ocean all the way up to the African coast. And secondly has come the ASEAN view of the Indo-Pacific, where you see as two different entities that are connected. I think that's the best way that we could go. Because there is also the developments that are taking place in the Indian Ocean. Now, while we are talking of this, there are new concepts that are coming in. We have to understand. Firstly, China has already got access to the Indian Ocean through Pakistan, the Friendship Highway. They will come into the Bay of Bengal through Myanmar, another port. They get access from the interior of China. So that alone. Then on the other hand, the agreements between India and Sri Lanka on connectivity, on developing the Trincomalee harbour also makes a change there. Then on the other hand are the new roads, as I said, one that will go into, one that will take us into Central Asia. Secondly, the second one is again what India, the Mumbai, UAE, Israel, Europe connection. That won't take place immediately, but it is going to, it will take place, maybe take about another 10 years, 15 years, but it will most probably come through. Because once the Indian economy, if it hits half of what the Chinese economy has got to, you won't have enough space, you won't be able to send the goods across. Suez Canal will not be sufficient. We have to find other ways of approaching it. So in this background, there is one more issue that has come up now, which is really Gaza. What's happening there? The Hamas attack on Israel we have all condemned. But the war in Gaza has created issues. And that's again, we'll have the sentiment is not with US. And may not be for some time, maybe 5 years, 6 years, longer. But that's also going to affect diplomacy, whatever the governments want to do. Gaza has become another issue, and it's an important issue here because remember, from the Middle East all the way to Indonesia is the Ark of Islam. So how are you going to manage here? So this will guide the developments in the Indian Ocean in the next few years, in the coming decade. But first is to accept Indian Ocean and its own identity and its own history and negotiate from there onwards. That is, to me, the best way, because most of us in the Indian Ocean, or all of us, will insist that identity be retained. There should be no big power rivalry, and how we go ahead. So we feel much of the development in the 21st century is going to shift not merely to India, but beyond that to Africa. So that's where it is. And while we've driven it, also you've seen a change where excuse me for saying it, but the European influence has got limited. There was a talk of NATO coming into the Indian Ocean. Now the question is not coming into the Indian Ocean or Pacific. It's real that NATO is an organization that can only handle West, and that's the important issue that. So there will be a change here. It has to take place because the Asian viewpoint of ours, which has been which was first stated in the Bandung Declaration and subsequently in the IORA Leaders Declaration in Jakarta, I think in 2017, will have to guide us in the developments of the Indian Ocean. I don't want to take any more of your time, but I just express my thoughts as to what the developments would be. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We will now be taking a photograph of the speakers and panelists with His Excellency the President. For the first photograph, may I please call upon the following persons: Her Excellency the Ambassador of the United States, His Excellency Hayashi Makoto, Mr. Kim Harriet Dara, Dr. Arnab Das, and Dr. Richard Gio. Thank you. For the second photograph, may I please call upon Mr. K. Balasundaram, CEO of Pathfinder Foundation, Dr. Dayaratna Silva, Executive Director of Pathfinder Foundation, Ambassador Ahmad Jawad, Director, Center for Indo-Lanka Initiatives of Pathfinder Foundation, Ambassador HMGS Palihakara, Admiral Jayantha Pereira, Rear Admiral Dimuthu Gunawardena, and Professor Turney Pradeep Kumara. Thank you, Your Excellency. Please give us a minute until the speakers of the head table return. We will recommence the session in about 3 minutes. Please bear with us. We will now continue with the conference proceedings. It is my pleasure to invite Ambassador Shivshankar Menon, co-chair Pathfinder Indian Ocean Security Conference, to deliver his introductory remarks.
You're right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. And I'm very honored to be here at this third phase of the Pathfinder Indian Ocean Security Conference, and delighted to see some old friends. And my particular thanks to the Pathfinder Foundation for the really excellent arrangements that you've made for us here. Your foundation has truly lived up to its name as Pathfinders in the matter of Indian Ocean security. When we started this series of conversations and meetings a little over 5 years ago, I think the situation was much easier in the Indian Ocean region. If you think back to it, so you chose your moment. I'm a bit nervous of what you're going to choose next. But when we look back, and we've just heard both Bernard and the President give us a masterly summary of where we are today in the Indian Ocean region, it's always been a diverse, a plural part of the world. In history, it's also been an ocean of peace, partly because the geography is open. It's not a closed ocean. It's hard for anyone to think that they can control all the choke points. Even Pax Britannica never quite managed all the choke points around the Indian Ocean. And in history, it's been the center of world trade. And in many ways, we have now come back to that old position. We have become so again. We have become central to world trade. Bernard reminded us of how that has happened. But today it's more complicated, as the President just told us. You consider the most recent headlines. Today we have threats to the global commons. We have multiple kinds of threats to security through the Indian Ocean region, and security in the broadest sense is at risk here. Consider, for instance, the Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea and the resumption of piracy off the Somali coast. By some accounts, this has led to the rerouting of about 90% of container ships that would normally use the Red Sea route. In more normal times, the Red Sea accounted for about 1/3 of all global container traffic and 40% of all trade between Asia and Europe. And container prices on some routes have tripled or even quadrupled. But there are also larger issues that should concern us, and I'm glad that our agenda for today and tomorrow includes this. These include challenges to international law, as expressed in UNCLOS, which we all negotiated with such difficulty. And several countries now feel that their sovereignty, their independence is under threat. Transnational, non-traditional threats are actually enhanced by a host of illegal activities now, enabled by technology in ways that we couldn't think of earlier. And on top of that, you have the effects of climate change on the ocean, on livelihoods, not just of fishermen, and natural disasters. So what really makes these more dangerous and harder to solve is two things. One, it's the overlay of geopolitics and great power rivalry that they've now acquired. In effect, negotiating and making concessions necessary to peaceful solutions has become much more difficult, partly because of great power rivalry, but also because we've seen the rise to power in many significant countries of new authoritarian leaders who base their legitimacy on nationalism or ultranationalism. This makes compromise, give and take, much harder for them. So we are now in a world that I like to say is between orders. This is not a settled world where the order is established. And in fact, you have a world where all the great powers are dissatisfied or are revisionist, really, in traditional terms. When somebody says, make America great again or build back better, you're expressing dissatisfaction with the present. That's a revisionist sentiment. And this goes across the board, whether it's a China Dream or whoever you talk to. This, for me, is worrying. And in the absence of an accepted international order, several powers see or think they see opportunity. Russia in the Ukraine, Hamas in Gaza, Israel in Gaza, Hamas in Israel. The list is long, and it's getting longer if you look at it today. So this works both ways, great power rivalry. On the one hand, you see many more initiatives by middle and other powers to try and assert themselves, assert their interests. On the other hand, it creates balancing opportunities for middle powers and the others to play the great powers against each other. And in more settled orders, those kinds of balancing opportunities not available. Just think of it. The admiral heading Indo-PACOM is in Nepal this week, a landlocked country. What does that tell you? So what should we do about this? I mean, I wish I knew, because I wish I had an answer for you. Because I don't think you can depend on the UN, the multilateral system anymore. Not for any fault of the UN or the multilateral system, but the whole multilateral system is based on member states as the constituent units. Now, if those member states are quarreling among themselves, how do you expect the system to work? And it's unfair to blame the system or to expect it to deliver effectively. So that's why when I say this is an era between orders of great power rivalry, it makes the multilateral system ineffective. So what we have instead is, instead of old-style multilateralism, is a set of plurilateral arrangements, different ones. I mean, and there's been an explosion of them. I mean, the Quad is the one that gets a lot of attention, but if you actually think of it, what Sri Lanka did in the Colombo Security Conclave, for instance, was a creative and effective approach that is worth looking at and maybe emulating in other geographies. But there's a whole host of them. IORA, many of them were mentioned earlier, the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, etc. And they all need to be made more effective, but they're all partial. They all address bits of the problem. And they don't address the general threats to the global commons that I mentioned at the beginning. There are also, of course, ad hoc measures taken by some members of the international community, most of them reactive, such as Operation Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea, which the President mentioned, which obviously demonstrates how important this ocean is to global interests. But, you know, there's only one of the participants in that operation is local, bordering the Red Sea, Bahrain. That tells you that it tells you the lack of a local order, I suppose, or else possibly even of limited local interest and capability. India has undertaken what is probably its largest naval deployment to the waters off the Somali coast in response to the resurrection of piracy and the recent attacks on shipping. But interestingly, some of the world's greatest trading powers, global trading powers, whose interests are clearly affected by spiraling violence in West Asia and in the Western Indian Ocean, are absent from these ad hoc arrangements. And I can only ascribe this either to their limited diplomatic and military capability or to an absence of interest in working with the other powers. And that's what makes me so nervous. So now that I've cheered you up about how we can deal with it, it seems to me that in many ways what we will discuss in the next 2 days are a microcosm of what the world faces in other contexts and on other issues as well, when you think of the effects of great power rivalry and the absence of an order. So since I don't have a solution, I'm hoping that you will come up with a solution over the next 2 days. You've gathered here a very high level of expertise, and you have people here from a wide range of countries, all of whom share a strong interest in the peace and security of the sea lanes that we depend on in the Indian Ocean. So I wish you every success in your deliberations, and I'm confident that, like its two predecessors, this conference too will be productive, meaningful, and very successful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. May I now call upon Her Excellency Julie Chung, Ambassador of the United States of America.
Thank you. Good morning, friends, Excellencies, Deputy Director General Makoto, my fellow diplomatic colleagues. It's a privilege and an honor to be here at the opening of this third Indian Ocean Conference. A special thanks to the Pathfinder Foundation and co-chair Ambassadors Goonetilleke and Menon for their continued leadership for fostering this ongoing constructive dialogue on peace and security, and a special thanks to Ambassador Melinda Moragota. Now, before I start, I just wanted to throw out one challenge to Pathfinder. As I looked at the agenda of all the moderators and speakers, I noticed that I'm the only woman speaker of about a dozen or more. And I'm sure there are dozens, hundreds of women experts in the international security field who would be flattered if invited to speak at this event next year. So I throw out that challenge to a Pathfinder for a more diverse panel of a set of gender diverse and other diverse representatives at this important conference. Now, I had the pleasure of speaking at the second iteration of this very conference back in March of 2022, not long after I first arrived in Sri Lanka. It was actually my very first public speech here. At that time, I said our vision for the Indo-Pacific recognizes that much of the planet's future will be based on what happens in this region. And I also said that this is why Sri Lanka, located at the heart of the Indo-Pacific, can act now to seize a leading role in the future. 2 years later, here we are, and I am more in confidence than ever about this affirmation about Sri Lanka's role. Now, I know the President had mentioned Sri Lanka as a battleground for geopolitical rivalries. I don't think that's the right question. Instead of asking whether Sri Lanka would be a battleground, it suggests a very passive role, letting yourself be a battleground. Instead of that, Sri Lanka can assert its identity, its sovereignty, and take a hold and shape its own future destiny and the future of this region. I think that's the right question we all should be asking ourselves today. Now, 2 years ago, it was then that the United States launched its Indo-Pacific strategy, which focuses on promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific that is connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. The IPS seeks to galvanize bilateral and multilateral relationships across the Indo-Pacific region. For Sri Lanka, that means, of course, focusing on its immediate Indian Ocean neighbors and environs. But why limit yourself there? Think big. It means building or expanding connections within and beyond the Indian Ocean region, and to see how it can help facilitate linkages and relationships with distant partners as well. It's not asking, how does Sri Lanka fit into the Indo-Pacific, but how do you grasp all the opportunities that are here to be offered and act as a leader? As we know, oceans see no borders, And it only makes sense for Sri Lanka to broaden its strategic influence to encompass both the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Oceans. That's going to be the core of my talk today. We want to recognize some of these Indo-Pacific linkages already that are in existence for Sri Lanka. I recently helped launch a U.S. government-funded ports capacity building program by the Colombo Plan. It not only sends experts to study ports in the United States, but helps build cybersecurity capabilities and gives Sri Lanka's Ports Authority the know-how and technical expertise to innovate port operations and expose SLPA staff to the latest international standards and best practices. Just this week, we are hosting a cybersecurity workshop in Colombo that will build upon these efforts. And it's to secure the infrastructure and the various sources of national security from cyber and ransomware attacks, so critical to all of our national securities. Now, the Colombo Plan, founded and headquartered here in Colombo, is a decades-old development platform with member states from across East Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East, and as far as west as the United States and Chile. In addition, Sri Lanka is now the current chair of the IORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and IORA is the only diplomatic ministerial-level platform in the Indian Ocean region and includes dialogue partners including from Europe and East Asia. As the sitting chair, Sri Lanka is in a position to drive inter-regional cooperation on economic development and political dialogue for the next 2 years. So needless to say, Sri Lanka is already playing that outsized role in helping to shape global policy. And acknowledging the value of being a part of the larger global community, Sri Lanka is currently pursuing a membership in the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This is something the President has said many times. This move matters to Sri Lanka because it would enhance economic ties and make it easier to trade goods and services with RCEP's Asia-Pacific member countries. But more importantly, by doing this, Sri Lanka strengthens its role as a bridge between nations in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean regions. And the U.S. sees this as a win-win for economic growth and regional stability. You've also gathered here today to discuss Indian Ocean security. The U.S. continues to play an active role in strengthening Sri Lanka's capacity to protect its territorial waters. We have donated 3 former U.S. Coast Guard cutters to Sri Lanka's Navy and have provided a variety of other security assistance. And just last Friday, Deputy Secretary of State Richard Verma was here. He announced a planned donation of a 4th Coast Guard cutter to the Sri Lankan Navy. And this demonstrates our continued commitment to bolster Sri Lanka's own capacity to advance freedom of navigation by addressing key maritime challenges including piracy, human smuggling, human trafficking, drug smuggling, and illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. We recently witnessed Sri Lanka addressing global challenges head-on and broadening its role on the world stage by sending one of those donated cutters to support Operation Prosperity Guardian that the President mentioned. The Sri Lankan Navy joined a multinational coalition of naval vessels in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and the Arabian Sea from over a dozen countries to help safeguard the freedom of navigation and protect the busy sea lanes of commercial ship traffic from Houthi attacks. This is a clear demonstration of Sri Lanka playing an active role in helping to secure the global supply chain that benefits both Sri Lanka but also the economies of the world. Thanking Sri Lanka for this leadership was an important message conveyed during the recent visit of the Deputy Secretary and others. Another aspect of the IPS is to promote resiliency to 21st century transnational threats, which includes disruptions to global supply chains. Sri Lanka plays a vital role in facilitating the steady flow of goods as it hosts the only transshipment hub in South Asia. As you know, these supply chains represent the commercial lifelines for economies across the region and around the world. Not only is Sri Lanka contributing to the protection of those lifelines, but the Port of Colombo is facilitating that supply chain resilience by providing the storage and logistical movement of that essential cargo. And that's why the U.S. government, through our $553 million in financing from the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, is helping to further expand the Port of Colombo's capacity by nearly 50% through the construction of the West Container Terminal. This Sri Lankan-Indian joint venture project will enhance Sri Lanka's status on the world stage as the home of a vital transshipment hub essential to the flow of global trade. And finally, in addressing the different forms of transnational threats, the strategy focuses on, quote, the Indo-Pacific as the epicenter of the climate crisis, but as essential to the climate crisis solutions, unquote. While the impacts of climate change know no boundaries, Sri Lanka and the rest of the island nations across the Indo-Pacific are disproportionately threatened by rising sea levels, increasing water temperatures, depleting fish populations, eroding coastlines, and erratic weather patterns. Sri Lanka and its fellow island states are fighting a common cause and must join forces to face these climate-related challenges together. The U.S. is committed to supporting countries across the Indo-Pacific in protecting the environment, reducing emissions, and accelerating the clean energy. So let me conclude by quoting President Biden on the IPS. He said, quote, the future of each of our nations, and indeed the world, depends on a free and open Indo-Pacific, enduring and flourishing in the decades ahead, unquote. It's clear to me that Sri Lanka is positioned to seize a leading role, not to play a passive role and let itself become a battleground. And as I had hoped 2 years ago at this conference, when I said that Sri Lanka would become an emerging leading role, have that emerging leading role in this region, and even expand upon it across the greater Indo-Pacific, I can assure you the United States stands in support of this island nation as it looks beyond the horizon of the Indian Ocean and forges greater ties in collaboration with the rest of the world. Thank you.
His Excellency HAYASHI Makoto.
Good morning, everyone. Ambassador Goonetilleke, Ambassador Menon, and U.S. Ambassador Julie Chung, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am very honored to participate in this Indian Ocean Security Conference organized by the Pathfinder Foundation. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Pathfinder Foundation and all those involved for making today's third conference happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the recent spread of COVID-19, the crisis in Ukraine, and Houthis attacks on ships in the Red Sea have exposed the vulnerability of the global supply chain. The Indian Ocean has long been an important trade route and source of economic development for Asia, the Pacific, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. But in recent years, the international community has become increasingly divided and confrontational, and the Indian Ocean region is no exception. The Indian Ocean must be a place where diverse nations can coexist and prosper together under the rule of law. With this in mind, Japan is promoting free and open Indo-Pacific, we call FOIP, as a common vision to guide the international community, including the Indo-Pacific region, toward cooperation. Today, I would like to introduce the basic concept of FOIP and Japan's latest initiative. Japan has long emphasized the importance of the idea that Indian and Pacific Oceans should be seen as a whole, and that those oceans should be free and open. As the then Prime Minister Abe addressed the Indian Parliament in 2007 on the Conference of the Two Seas on the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Bringing this idea to fruition, a free and open Indo-Pacific was announced in 2016 with its basic principles of defending freedom and the rule of law, finding universality in diverse values, and promoting cooperation through dialogue. Japan's new national security strategy, formulated in December 2022, also places diplomacy under this FOIP vision as a top priority. In practical terms, this strategy represents a major shift in Japan's post-war security policy, and free and open in the Pacific can be seen at the core of this strategy. In March 2023, Prime Minister Kishida introduced a new plan for FOIP during his visit to India. Based on the basic principle of the free and open in the Pacific, the new plan set out 4 new pillars of cooperation. First, principles for peace and rules for prosperity. Second, addressing challenges in an Indo-Pacific way. Third, multi-layered connectivity. And fourth, expanding efforts for security and safe use from sea to air. In order to implement the new plan, Prime Minister Kishida announced to mobilize more than $75 billion in public and private funds in the Indo-Pacific region by 2030. The fourth pillar of the new plan, which is security and safe use from sea to air, will be of particular interest to today's participants. It aims to ensure the security and stability of the high seas as a whole, linking the security and stable use of the skies with the sea route that are the focus of free and open in the Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, taking this opportunity, I would like to underscore the importance of the 3 principles of rule of law at sea, namely making and clarifying claims based on international law, not using force or coercion in trying to drive their claims, and seeking to settle dispute by peaceful means. Law exists to protect the vulnerable, and the rule of law at sea protects the sea from the geopolitical risk. Last year, based on these 3 principles, the Japanese government formally adopted the position that it is permissible to preserve the existing baselines and maritime zones established in accordance with UNCLOS, notwithstanding the regression of coastlines due to sea level rise caused by climate change. With a view to protecting the freedom of the seas, various projects are also being provided to strengthen countries' maritime law enforcement capacity through human resource development, enhanced cooperation between maritime security agencies, and joint training with national coast guards. In addition, in order to protect the sea lanes that are the arteries of logistics, Japan has been making efforts, including support for capacity building to combat IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, support for strengthening the maritime law enforcement capacity of coastal states, support for management of maritime zone of jurisdiction, and the development of electronic nautical chart. In light of expanding its effort for security cooperation, My government develops legal infrastructure with countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Most notably, in April 2023, the government established a new framework of grant assistance, Official Security Assistance, OSA. This is a cooperation program that targets the armed forces and other related organizations of friendly countries as beneficiaries and provides materials and equipment as well as assistance for infrastructure development. In the first year of the OSA, Japan has signed the exchange of notes with the Philippines, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Fiji for the provision of the coastal surveillance radar systems and rescue and security vessels to help maintain and strengthen maritime security in the Pacific region. At the same time as promoting such efforts, countries must also work together to address the growing risk of marine pollution due to increased economic activities in the oceans. In this context, in order to upgrade maritime disaster management, Japan has provided assistance to the Sri Lankan Coast Guard, contributing to the improvement of its oil spill response capability. Japan will continue to actively promote multifaceted effort to realize the free and open Indo-Pacific, including the development of an industrial value chain connecting the Bay of Bengal with northeastern region of India, which aims to improve organic connectivity across the Bay of Bengal region, as well as the debt restructuring process of Sri Lanka, where Japan co-chaired a meeting of creditors countries with India and France as a part of efforts toward transparent and comparable development finances. Finally, as we have often stated, let me reiterate, a free and open Indo-Pacific is not against any particular idea or country, but is open and inclusive. Under this free and open Indo-Pacific philosophy, we intend to further strengthen our cooperation with the countries of the Indo-Pacific region by promoting concrete cooperation through new plan to overcome the various challenges facing the international community. I hope that today's meeting will be vibrant and will contribute to the stable development of the Indian Ocean in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency Hayashi Makoto. May I please call everyone outside for a group photograph and refreshments now, prior to commencing session 1.